Heavy gunfire at an airport today in eastern Ukraine after the government managed to take back control from members of a pro-Russian militia. Yesterday, President Obama spoke on the phone with Vladimir Putin about his country's support for militia members. The White House says he expressed grave concern. Over the weekend, a Russian fighter jet made multiple passes at close range near an American warship in the Black Sea, and a move that the Pentagon calls provocative. Jay Carney was asked whether it may be an indication that the foreign policy isn't working.
Isn't there a sense of administration and in the European capitals with which you are collaboratively dealing with that what is going on is not working? That whatever signals you're sending, they're either not being heeded or misread, and this entire approach, which is to not escalate, isn't working?
Well, no, Major, because the premise of the question is based on the notion that all the United States ever has to do when something happens in the world that we don't like is say, stop it, and they'll stop.
Bob, by all accounts, tensions are very high, and on either side there could be a miscalculation and a provocation that could escalate this into actual warfare, or civil war in Ukraine. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think there's a couple things here we should take note of, and that is that the unrest in the Ukraine itself of these pro-Russian demonstrators, that Putin had the gall to ask Obama to please help stop these people from being protesters, for doing into these protests. Already they've taken over one town in the Ukraine. I think the answer now is, and it's very interesting, they sent John Brennan, who's the head of the CIA, over there this weekend. I think what you're beginning to see is an idea that we're going to move beyond economic sanctions into more military-oriented, giving Ukraine military capability that they may need, whether it's for anti-helicopter missiles or other kinds of things. It's time, I think, now to escalate in terms of military action within the Ukraine itself. Let the Ukraine army take care of it.
But do you think, Greg, it's too little too late at this point?
Yeah, I don't think there ever was an approach. I think it was more like a retreat. America as a global power decided that, we wanted to concentrate on ourselves. I want to work on myself instead. That's what Obama said. But burying your head in the sand doesn't make the ocean go away. And Putin saw that opportunity. He saw the president as a beta male, more obsessed with Sandra Fluck than actual security. And he took advantage of it. And by the way, old beliefs die hard. If you think that America was a bad guy in the 70s and the 80s, do you think you're going to change your mind? I'm not talking about Putin.
Aha, I get it. It took me a minute, though. Eric, let me ask you about an info surge. So the CIA's John Brennan goes, one of the concerns was that the United States wasn't sharing information, intel, and that you have pro-Russian forces there. It was actually Vladimir Putin who made the request to Obama to have a phone call last night. And I feel like from a communication strategy that they're just outfoxing us.
And they are, and I think maybe they have their ear to the ground. I think America's divided on this. I think, it's one of those issues. There are a couple that float around where, really it's not right-left divided. It's divided by how you see where our foreign policy should be. Believe it or not, I think Obama's playing this the right way. I think he's keeping his distance. What's going on with
But they argue that they're not.
Right. Who is?
That the White House argues that their policy is working. That's what Jay Carney was just saying.
With them.
You agree that their policy is working, but they're saying, but you disagree on what the policy is from their perspective.
And I don't even disagree with what we're doing. I agree with what we're doing. If Europe, if the rest of Europe, if Western Europe isn't involved, if Germany's not involved, if the other
but my point is that the White House says that they are involved and that they're heavily involved and that we're doing all of the right things. But
that's my point. I think we're okay, and my point is maybe you're surprised to hear me say that. But even with the unrest that's going on within Ukraine, that's not Russian forces. Russian forces are on the border. They're not entering Ukraine doing this. This is happening from within.
These are Russian agents doing the work in the Ukraine. I mean, come on.
Sent there by Vladimir Putin.
I think we have to be
himself.
fairly clear-eyed about that, Andrea. Let me ask you if you think that on the intel side of things, was that enough, or should we maybe unleash Google and Twitter to go and be the voice where Vladimir Putin has shut down free information, access to free information?
I'm not sure he cares about that. I mean, ultimately, yes, he's winning the PR battle, but he wants to take over these former Soviet countries, so I don't think Twitter would scare him. I do not think that Obama should be involved with this Russian issue, but I do disagree with what they've done up until this point. If you look at the way Reagan handled it, he put intermediate nukes right in Western Europe. He did it so that they wouldn't have to have this debate in the country that we're having now, which is, should we send troops in? The shame here, too, is that we are following the lead of the EU. They've tossed aside their defense budgets in favor of a welfare state. We're doing that. Greg mentioned the president's like, yeah, we're going to stay here and work on ourselves, while we're, quote, more flexible with you guys and we're going to downsize our army. So I actually think by saying we're cutting our defense budgets, focusing more on the welfare state, I think that up until now, the president has failed. And it's a shame because the Ukraine is a fairly Western country, unlike Turkey. It should be in NATO. But now, because of a feckless EU and a feckless President Obama, it won't be. And that's why we're in that position.
In fairness to that, it was the Ukrainians, when they had this new president, who pulled out of their request for NATO. Interesting enough, Poland has said we should put NATO troops there. They can't get the rest of NATO to agree. But I've got to correct you on just one thing. I hate to do it, but those intermediate missiles went in there in 79 and 80. They did not go in there because of Ronald Reagan.
But but the point is,
they didn't.
Yes, they did.
They did not. Harold Brown did that. He was the Secretary of Defense.
But I think the point is, this feud was supposed to be behind us because of peace through strength. We put out a visage that was intimidating, but it turns out the reset button actually reset the Cold War. Obama's like a doctor who brings back the measles. I mean, this stuff we shouldn't be worrying about.
But I also don't think that we need to have a policy of war or ignore. I think there is a middle ground. And last November, when in the United States, when we were working on ourselves and we were working on, the president was working on the fact that the website for his health care bill had completely crashed. That was when the Ukrainians actually voted for Yanukovych, who ran on closer economic ties with the European Union. We didn't do enough to help them at that point, and now I think this is why we've come to this point.
And they're also, I would not worry about the Cold War. I hate to say this, but I will be more than happy to say it. Russia is a feckless, ineffective country.
But the spread of the EU and NATO was a huge Putin goal, was to get them to back off, no missiles.
They didn't.
And he got his way. So on a global stage, Putin is winning, and we're not.
Well, he lost. Poland became part of NATO. Estonia. I mean, everything except for the Ukraine.
That's what really scares him, Bob.
And
That's
those
what really
missiles were put in
frightens
there. I
him.
tell
And
you,
we've raised our hand and said, well, we don't need them anymore because Iran's
Why
not
are
a
you
threat.
worried about the Russians? What could the world could they possibly do except cut off oil to Eastern Europe?
Well, look, you're right.
And
It's
they really
a terribly
can't even
weak country, except for
do
its nukes mask the reality that it is a weak country.
That's what they've got.
But it sends a message to every other scary world leader like Iran that we have a very wimpy administration.
All right, still to come on The Five. Boston and the...